in my opinion, in 25 years doing this, it's the scariest time that I've ever seen. And the reason that is like, as someone like myself, and this is even forget like stocks. So it's just because a lot of how I've written over the last week, whatever, 20 notes, it's writing more as like an American citizen, like as a U.S. citizen, really as someone that understands the supply chain, understands the reality of how we produce, the mechanics of big tech. Look, I think it's these tariffs, in my opinion, could take big tech, the U.S. tech industry back a decade. When you're playing a game of high stakes poker like this, you're playing with the economy. You're playing with ultimately CapEx, large purchases, and understand the rules of the game. So essentially what he single-handedly has done, I think as an administration, they've set off a snowball that's going downhill. And for someone like myself that speak to hundreds of people in terms of buyers and our team, buyers of spending, in terms of what CapEx looks like projects, I think 15 to 20% of projects, CapEx, automatically halted. Then you start to look at what else could ultimately be slowed down over. And I just believe we're going into an earnings season, besides just no guidance, street numbers already baking in probably 8 to 10% cuts across the board, whether it's NVIDIA, Microsoft, pick your spot. But my view is like the longer this continues, because of the nature of what you're bringing in and the impact that tariffs have, not even just on a baseline 10%, when you look what's happened in China, 30% of ships ultimately got turned around. So my view, it's not even just in terms of like these stocks and can they recover and go through it. My worry, and I've talked about it over the last week, is that you are fundamentally taking what I believe is probably one of the biggest assets in this country in terms of U.S. tech and basically taking it back many, many years, China ultimately giving them the leap. But there's no one that's more bullish in terms of tech than me.
Yeah.
But like I could call it like I see it. So when as someone that spent my career in Taiwan, in China, in Asia, Vietnam, understand supply chains, the concept that we're actually going to try to bring Apple would take $30 billion, 3 years to take 10%. If you like $3,500 iPhones, we should make them in New Jersey or Illinois. So the reality is that's why. And then guess what? As all this happening, from NVIDIA to Microsoft, who do you think is ultimately going to benefit? BABA, JD, BYD, Huawei. So the irony is like you're burning your house down yourself, but yet at the same time, it's really China that ultimately holds the cards because where are the raw materials? Where are the chips? And everyone's like, we can make it here. Have you ever been to a fab in Taiwan? Go to a fab for 3 hours and tell me that we could do that here. Where you paying someone $24 to work at Chipotle or Starbucks. The labor, the nature of our infrastructure here, how long it would take, it doesn't work. So the reason that I've been so negative as someone that's been positive for decades, it's the reality of what's happened. Even when you go back to like financial crisis, dot-com bubble, COVID, you be like, valuation, where's numbers? Throw out the next 2-3 quarters. What could numbers be over the next 1-2 years? Here, it's systemic. It's a structural thing that's happening to U.S. tech. That's why I've been so outspoken in terms of what's happened.
Tim Cook has spent 40 years of his life, or 35, basically creating the infrastructure that has that manufacturing capability over there at low at low cost,
Foxconn,
and orienting the entire, supply chain, right? To do this, people. When you order your iPhone on September 20th and it's delivered to you on September 27th, you can look at the FedEx tracking thing and it left Shangzhou or some shit like that, 3 days earlier, and it's sitting at your doorstep. You know what I mean? Like, that is the brilliance of Apple, right? That's why
it is the brilliance of we wouldn't talk AI revolution. Look what NVIDIA and Jensen did in terms of with their chips.
Right.
Where are those chips produced? Ohio? So the reality is these companies can't all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what? Nathan Ives, they open up that new fab in North Carolina. Let's call them, and instead of buying from Taiwan, we're gonna call from them. There's only one problem. That doesn't exist. And it'll take 4 to 5 years to build. Yeah. And then when you build it, it will be 15x more expensive.
And robots are going to be putting this stuff together.
And then it goes to that whole thing. And that's why, but then it speaks to why, like, I've been so outspoken this week trying to explain, not just from an investor perspective, but to the average U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
What's coming.
2021, we have this period that kind of was post all of this sort of stuff that we're talking about, like a breakdown in supply chains, lack of demand, right? And then that turned on a dime, right? From 2020 to 2021. And, valuations got crazy, unprofitable tech IPOs, SPACs, crypto, all this sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden, the Fed comes to this conclusion that inflation is a problem. They signal they're going to start raising interest rates off of a zero interest rate bound. And all of the most expensive speculative stuff in the market gets hit really hard in 2022. I think the NASDAQ closed down more than 30%. The S&P closed down 20-some%, but it felt very orderly, right? So interest rates went like this, stair step. Stocks, it was orderly, right? You took a lot of froth out of the market. So my question first is that in that sort of period, in that sort of sell-off, were you able to maintain your general bullish view?
100%.
Okay. It felt normal to you. It felt
normal to me. This feels not just not feel normal. This is crazy. I mean, I'm talking like it's like an investor's like every time I shut my phone off, put it back on, 10 voicemails.
Right.
Wake up in the morning, 40 missed calls. Because the reality is that this is totally different. Because to your point, going to that example, was the government trying to basically burn that whole thing down? And then to the second time, what's the alternative? That's like you being in the ocean. I flip your boat in the middle of the ocean, no life raft, and I'll be like, oh, when you get back to shore, we'll hang out. That's kind of big tech right now. And look, no CEOs have spoken out because I think they're trying to figure out behind the scenes what they do, as well as also like this is.
Well, they fear retribution.
And they fear and that. Look, and that speaks to the whole, like, from an investor perspective, like, how do you play it? What makes me very sad, not even as an analyst, it's the first time that I've felt in my whole career that U.S. was ahead of China in tech. For so many years, I go to China and I come back and go to Silicon Valley, and I'm like, oh, they're just... Whether it was like, on the auto side, whether it was on disruptive tech, whether it was on chips, and AI was the first time like we own it. No, I'm saying like from NVIDIA to Microsoft to Palantir to autonomous, and the reality is that what this is doing, it's like a Jenga puzzle, and you're just, and that. And many companies that I talk to, many buyers, they're recognizing that. If I just sat here in New York City or San Fran or Marin or wherever, Florida, and basically just viewed things out of like my little bubble, to be honest, I'd be like more bullish because I wouldn't like. It's almost like I talk to other people in the financial community. You're like, okay, market's going to work itself out. For the long term, there's a game of poker.
Yeah.
And fortunately, by traveling around the world my whole life, you talk to so many people from around the world, so many people in the supply chain, so many companies. And the more you talk to them over the last week, and especially this weekend, that's what makes you the most negative.
So as negative as you are, part of it has to do with the fact that all of a sudden, all these kind of outward sort of partners, you know what I mean? Whether they're allies or adversaries, they're looking at what's going on and they've gotten considerably like negative. They've gotten very negative about what's going on here. And you can't turn that on a dime, right? Because we've lost confidence by those folks, you know what I mean? In the way in which we've done business for 40 years.
But the other thing being when companies report earnings, it's companies that spend money software. If those CapEx purchases and slow hiring, cautious, what do you think that does? The reality is, like, and you know, being bullish Tesla for a decade, but we've talked about it. Like our biggest frustration. I mean, look, and you've talked about it for a long time. For me, it's just really more about the brand issue, what he's done. I mean, I think there's...
And that's something that's been building for you for a couple of
quarters.
Look,
I think it's 20% permanent destruction in Europe.
Most of your peers basically, though, think it's like mid-single digits at best, like brand destruction.
And remember,
as far as demand.
And I've been probably the big, Jonas, the biggest support. But I'm telling you right now, like, in Europe, it's the brand destruction's real. In U.S., the brand destruction has been small and growing. And my whole thing is that you talk about self-created, like I just continue to say he needs to leave the government because the longer he stays there, the brand destruction continues to increase. See, the difference with me and you is that I'm more bullish on the view of like, when it comes to AI, I believe the holy grail is physical AI. Mm-hmm. That's my... So when it comes like
full self-driving, robotaxi, and Optimus, they're all built on
physical. Yeah. So but it goes back to like NVIDIA. Like you talk about use cases, you haven't seen them. Like I think like the holy grail for AI, and I mean you've talked about it for even a few years. It's about autonomous and robotics. Now, if you weren't bullish on autonomous and robotics,
you should not own this stock.
You wouldn't own this stock.
Right.
So to me, that's 90% of the value. Like
but that's the thing I just take issue with is like, there's gravity in markets, right? You know that, right? And so ultimately, when the rubber hits the road, in an environment like this is a great example, is like I'm taking the over on robotaxi and robotics. Why? Last year when they've held events for these, robotaxi was a 2-seated cab. Like, are you kidding me? Like no one would call up. It actually goes against what you're thinking about is like an alternative to, you know what I mean? Driving a car.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Will you ever, so let's say it's 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Would you ever take a ride in a robotaxi or cyber?
I've been in Waymos. I love them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing. I mean, like I would probably not from a brand perspective because if Waymo is going to be, competing with,
but Waymo are $240,000 cars that can scale. I mean,
I agree with that, by the way, because I've been in those Jaguars and all the LiDAR equipment.
And they're only in 4 cities.
But I want to take the over in when his vision of robotaxi based on cameras and AI powered this and that or whatever. I just don't think that's happening anytime soon.
Let me say, like if unsupervised FSD hits in Austin in June, would that change your view?
Like it's not hitting there. I'll just, you know what I mean? Like that June event is going to get pushed out to October like it did last summer, right? I'm just telling you. No, and he's sitting in the White House and he made that bet because he thought that he could get rid of the regulation that's stopping full self-driving. And then that's a next step towards, Robotaxi. The other thing is you talk about, the cost about scaling Waymo. He's talking about using consumers' cars as part of the fleet for robotaxi. Yeah. That's never happening. They need depots, they need cleaning, they need charging. I mean, the list goes on and on. You think consumers are going to be doing that? You remember that company Toro where you could that thing is a zero. You know what I mean? Like, so I guess my point is like, I'm discounting anything out of that guy's mouth because as long as he's been running this company, if you had done that, if you got like $1 million discounting every major, thing, you would not have to work anymore.